Hello and welcome to Introduction to Story Structure. My name is Jessica. I'm a clerk with the Macedon Public Library. Thank you for joining me today. You'll have to excuse me if my voice is a little rough because I've actually recorded this twice now. The first time I was a bit long and rambling, so I'm going to try to shorten it up a little bit. So, first of all, I wanted to start with clearly what is story structure? Pretty self-explanatory. It is the structure of a story. It's the underlying framework that you build your story upon. Why is it important? Well, if you've ever built any sort of structure, you know that you want a good foundation. You want a good framework to hold up what is built on top of it. So clearly, this is only one part of writing. There are several parts to building a complete story. And this goes really for whether you're writing fiction or even nonfiction, because if you're writing a memoir or a story of that nature, I mean, unless you're writing nonfiction as in something with empirical data, if you're writing a memoir, more say, you do still want to follow a narrative story structure. This same structure also works for screenwriting as well. What you see before you is your sort of basic plot structure figure. And the reason I started with this is because I studied writing, have studied writing for several years. I did go to college for English literature. I have a bachelor's degree in literature, so I have been studying stories for many, many years. And whenever I would see something like the figure you see before you, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. You can see this is very basic. You've got your exposition, which means your introduction where you're just sort of giving information, rising action, peaking at a climax, falling action, resolution. And while this does have a place in story structure, to me, this never resonated. So I wanted to start with that just to show you what you might have seen in the past and how I'm actually going to be showing you a little something different. Another example of what you might have seen is something like maybe like this, is the classic 3-act story structure. Again, the 3-act story structure, I don't know why. I've heard of it over and over and over and over and over again, and yet I couldn't quite understand it. It just didn't, I couldn't wrap my head around it. So you can see here, there's a lot going on. This is, whereas the other one was very basic, this one has a lot of things going on. And this is just something that I had seen in the past that still, it just didn't really bring it home for me. What did was what I'm going to share with you today. So what you can see here is a story structure broken down into several parts. And what I'm going to go over today is how these parts come together to form a story that resonates with readers, or in the case of a screenplay, something that resonates with watchers, with moviegoers. You might have come across those stories in the past where even if they're very basic, they just resonate with you. You find them enjoyable. They're not all epic tales, but maybe it's just a basic story, or maybe it's just a basic movie. And for some reason, you just find that you really enjoy it. It's just very satisfying. And usually you'll find is that they hit all of these points, and they hit them in the percentages listed here. So we're going to go over that. Counter to that, a lot of the times if you come across a story that just doesn't feel right, that you like the premise, maybe you like the characters, maybe you like a lot about it, but it just isn't really doing it for you. A lot of times what you'll find is that it is missing these particular beats, or they're out of order, or they're out of these ratios to each other. So some things I do want you to keep in mind as we go over this is we're going to talk about these percentages here and where these things happen in the story. When it comes to a first draft, don't worry about it. Don't worry about drafting, to your first plot point being exactly 25%. Just get the story down on the page. Any writer will tell you what makes you a writer? You have to write. You just write. And also, you can't edit a story that doesn't exist, that hasn't been written out. What I find is this story structure helps me at the beginning and it helps me at the end. It helps me at the beginning to plot out the overarching story, because a lot of times I might come up with a good idea. Maybe I had a good premise. Maybe I even have a good conclusion, but I get kind of lost in the middle and it gets sort of meandering and long or maybe you've written a story and you're at the editing point and you're not quite sure how to fix it. You're not quite sure something just doesn't feel right. A lot of the times it goes back to the structure and it goes back to the ratio of these specific points. But as I said, when it comes to a first draft, don't worry about it. Just write. And then you can always, this is more when you go to editing that you worry about hitting the timeline, editing things out or adding, or usually you're taking out. But like maybe in the beginning, you're doing a lot of exposition dump because you're building your world, you're building your characters, and you're not sure, how you can weave those in later. So your first part ends up really long, but then you discover after you've written the whole thing, oh, I wove that in later, I can take this out, things like that. So the other thing to remember is that this is not a formula. It is just a reminder of location and what its purpose is. When it comes to screenplays, I have heard that it's much closer to this. They really do want it right on the mark of pages and number of words, that they really do want things to hit at certain times. So if your focus is to do screenwriting, then you do want to adhere to this a little more closely. Something else that is just a good thing to keep in mind is a lot of people believe that the definition of story is that you have to have conflict. And it's not necessarily true. It's a bit of a change in wording. What you do need is opposition. So you do need somebody who wants something and someone or something that is stopping them from getting it or achieving it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, say, like a hero versus a villain and there's a high conflict. It could be a story about a character who is getting in their own way. You do need opposition. They want something is preventing them from getting it. Often at the end of the story, they find out that the thing that they want wasn't really what they needed. That's another sort of conflict, is that you can explore too, is what the characters want and then finding out that it wasn't what they needed. But that's a whole other thing. I just had to take a sip of water. So let's get into this. So here are the things that really need to exist for any story to have that resonance with your readers. You need a hook. This is a hint of what is to come in the story. It happens usually within the first 20 pages. Sometimes it can be the first line, but you really do want it to come towards the beginning. It doesn't have to come right away, but it is that thing that hooks you into the story. Running up to the first 20 to 25%, that's where you want to hit your first plot point. This usually introduces some antagonistic force or tells you what is at stake for the story. So like I said, not necessarily conflict, but opposition. The main character wants something and something is keeping them from getting it. Sometimes this too is usually some manner of call to action. In the traditional hero's journey, there is the call for adventure. And this is when that hits. The first thing that really takes that character out of their ordinary world and pushes them into a story. In between the first plot point and the midpoint, So in between the 25% mark and the 50% mark, you have what is known as a pinch point. A pinch point is simply a reminder to the audience of what's at stake. What is the antagonistic force and what is at stake for the protagonist? You want 2 of these overall. As you can see, one comes between the first plot point and the midpoint, and the second one comes between the midpoint and the second plot point. They're just little nudges, to tell the reader, hey, remember this. I know there's a lot going on, but this is the main thing that's at stake. The midpoint is where everything shifts. It gives new meaning to the story, usually through some manner of reveal or some new information. This could be, if you do have an antagonist, this could be where you unmask the real villain, or, maybe the characters had only been dealing with a vague notion of the villain, or maybe, agents. But not necessarily. You could wait to the second plot point to do that reveal. As I said, between the midpoint and the second plot point, you have another pinch point, another little reminder, little nudge, saying, hey, this is what's really at stake. This is what's underneath this all. And then you have the second plot point. This is the final piece of the puzzle, the last introduction of new information. This could be where you reveal like the real antagonist, oh, it was really so-and-so all along. But it is the last piece of everything coming together. And we're going to build upon this. So if this looks very bare bones, then we're going to keep building upon that. So here we go. We have our next step. You can see underneath those things, we now have labeled the parts of the story. So part 1 is the setup. This is from the beginning to the first plot point. What does this do? It includes the hook, or sometimes an inciting incident. It's not always an incident that happens, but usually it is, but it doesn't have to be. That's why we're calling it the hook here instead of the inciting incident. But this is setting up the ordinary world, life as it has been for the protagonist, or the town, or the, whatever, if you're not just dealing with one character. This is the ordinary world. This is how things have been. And something comes along to change that. And that's when we get to the first plot point, is where something happens enough that it moves the story into part 2, which is reaction. Why is it reaction? Because the characters are only reacting to what is happening to them. They're still like they're performing actions, but it's in response to some stimuli provided by that first plot point. They don't have enough information yet to be really moving under their own agency. They might think that they are, but there's usually, something that they're missing. If this was the case of, say, a detective story, you might have the reluctant detective who's close to retirement, and maybe there's some new mystery that comes up. That's the hook. The reader wants to be part of this mystery. The reader wants to solve it, but maybe the character doesn't, until you get to the first plot point in which they can no longer ignore that they're the person for the job, that they might even be reluctant to do so, but they have to get involved. But they don't have enough information yet to actively pursue, the person behind it. They might think that they have it. They might have wrong information. They might only have a piece of the information. They might have information they don't understand yet. So they're reacting. In this part 2 is also where you get a pinch point that tells you what's at stake. Just a little nudge, a little reminder. It doesn't have to be something big. It can be, a little bit of dialogue, or a quick thing that happens that just shows people, hey, remember, this is what's at stake here. This is what's really going on. The stakes are high, or the stakes are building. Part 3 is attack. This is where something happens in the midpoint that shifts those characters, or shifts the story from reaction to action. The characters are now ready to take action. They are being proactive. So something has put them into motion. They are now going to actively participate in the story. You know, in the case of maybe our detective story, maybe they were reluctant, maybe they had the skills to solve this crime, other people pushed them into it, but they weren't invested in it. And then maybe something happens at the midpoint. They find out that, you know, this is the same killer that killed their partner, or you know, this person knew their estranged father that they've been searching for years. Something that's big enough that it moves the story from reaction to action. Now they're on the hunt. Now they're actively pursuing the information. They're gathering information. They are really going for it. The story is starting to pick up momentum. It is really charging forward at this point. Sometimes in part 3, obviously in part 3, you do get another pinch point. You do get another little reminder of what's really at stake. You could have a lot happening on the surface, and it's what's underneath that you're reminding the audience that, like, no, but this is really the underlying what's at stake. Maybe the characters are fooling themselves, or maybe they don't understand. Maybe they think they want something, but this is really that thing that drives them. Sometimes it can also include, right before the second plot point, it can include something called the all is lost lull, which, as you can see, is, I forgot my close on my parentheses there, but you can see that it is, all seems lost. The cause seems hopeless. It seems like they've hit a wall. They've you know, come to the end of their information. There's no place else to go. Or maybe it seems like the stakes, or not the stakes, the you know, it's just the cause is just lost. Like, they can't move forward. Not all stories include this, but it can. This is where it would happen, is right before that second plot point. So part 4 happens after the second plot point. The second plot point is the transition into part 4, which is resolution. For me, I always kind of wasn't able to grasp when people talked about the climax of a story. And as you saw in that first graph, it almost looked like the climax was somewhere in the middle, and then the action starts to decelerate from there. And I couldn't wrap my head around that, because I was like, I thought the climax happened like right at the end. And I think this might just be maybe semantics, but how I'm using climax is sort of like the height of action, of maybe not so much the tension, but the height of the action of the story. And what helped me to understand this structure wasn't when it was explained to me like this, is the second plot point is the last bit of information. And this is what moves the story into the resolution phase. So that's where maybe the detective realizes, they get that final piece of the clue that says, oh, wait, it was the doctor, or, you know, we've been going in the wrong direction because we now have this piece of information that points, you know, in a completely new way. One thing to keep in mind, and I apologize if I am repeating myself, because as I said, this is the second time I've recorded this. What's really important is that when you hit that second plot point, moving into the resolution, from now on, everything from that point forward must have been set up before now, meaning no new information in the resolution. Like, say if you want to do a reveal, oh, the doctor was really the daughter of a criminal who his father captured, and she wanted revenge, so she posed as this. So you're doing that reveal. That's okay, as long as it was set up sometime before. So you needed to have mentioned that before. Oh, you know, my dad, this great police officer, he had, you know, record number of closed cases, and or his nemesis was this guy who he put in jail, and that was the big, you know, moment of his career. So like, we knew that before, so that this reveal that this character is the daughter of this man doesn't come out of nowhere. So from that point forward, the second plot point is the last bit of information. Everything else needs to have been set up before that. That's how you end up with those kind of deeply unsatisfying endings sometimes, where the solution maybe seems to come out of nowhere. You get that deus ex machina, sort of resolve to this seemingly unsolvable problem. You want to avoid that. It's very unsatisfying for readers and watchers. So just keep that in mind, that for the resolution phase, nothing new, no new information. You want to set it up before. And that also can happen in the editing phase. Maybe you realize, oh, hey, my big reveal, I didn't plant that enough further ahead. I need to add a few things. Okay. And so building on that, we have this overarching structure that really helped me kind of bring this all together. So another thing that you can call part one, or the setup, is the orphan phase. You have a story that's looking for a home. It hasn't found it yet. Or maybe you have a protagonist who the story hasn't found him or her. This is what, in Joseph Campbell terms, for the hero's journey, it's not yet begun. You're setting up the ordinary world, and the protagonist hears the call to adventure. And that's your first plot point. But until then, you're laying the groundwork. Your story hasn't found a home yet. Part two, you can call wanderer, the wanderer phase. The characters are wandering. They're reacting. Things are being done to them. They are maybe chasing, dead ends or leads, but they're wandering, or they don't have enough information to have a set direction. Part three, the action, them taking action, is the warrior phase. They are now in their character growth. They are now incentivized to take action. They have moved into warrior mode. They are willing to take action. They're ready to make a stand. They are working under their own agency now. They're being active. And the resolution phase is called the martyr phase. This is when the protagonist has maybe given up on their selfish motives. Maybe that thing in the beginning that they thought they wanted, they realize they have to let that go. They realize they have to grow, they have to change, they are now willing to do whatever it takes, including die, to defeat the antagonist. And obviously not all stories are going to have the stakes of death hanging over them, but just that in some cases they are. It goes as far as that the characters are willing to even sacrifice their life to defeat the big evil. So I do like those four distinctions, because that helps solidify it in my mind what these parts of the story are. You've got your story looking for a home. You've got your story sort of wandering. It doesn't have a direction yet, but it is moving. You have warrior, where the action is now, the story is now, it's on a path. It's moving in a direction. It is moving under its own agency. And then martyr, you're coming to a conclusion, you're coming to a resolution, and the stakes are very high, and your characters have to be willing to meet those stakes to resolve everything that's come before. Now, for a way to demonstrate this that might bring it home a little bit more, I decided to break down, I chose a screenplay. I didn't read the screenplay itself. I just took this from a movie that I have seen. So I just wanted to kind of break it down in a way that maybe would bring it home for people a little bit more. Another thing I will say is that if you do, if you have a book that resonates well with you, or a movie, you can actually take the overall page numbers, or maybe the time of that movie, and divide it by these percentages, and you will find these things within a few pages or a few minutes. Those good stories that really resonate with you, if you open up, the book to the middle of the page numbers, you will find the midpoint. If you open up to 25% of the book, you'll find that first plot point. Even if there's a lot going on and you feel like, I can't tell, what is what is this? What is the plot point? Because there's this, but there's this story, and then there's this story underneath it. I can't tell what's what. If you divide those up and go to those places, you'll be able to really see, like, oh, that's what's going on. That's the story. And you can train yourself to do this over time, and it will start to come naturally. You'll start to be able to, you'll be reading a book, and then you'll be like, oh, that was the first plot point. Oh, that was the pinch point. Oh, that's the hook. That's the, you'll be able to start to see them. I chose a movie to break down, and I'm going to go over it very quickly with you, just to kind of show you what I'm talking about here. The movie I chose was 20 years old, so hopefully this isn't a spoiler alert for anybody. But the movie I chose was a movie called Pitch Black. It came out in 2000. It is listed as a sci-fi action horror film. So I'm a wimp when it comes to horror. I mean, technically it is a horror because you do have a group of survivors and they are sort of being picked off. But as I recall, the CGI hasn't aged terribly well, so it's not very horrific. I do think it is rated PG-13 though, so I would recommend that you follow the rating system there. But here we go, just to give you an idea if you are familiar with the story. Where do you find the hook? A ship, in this case a spaceship because it's a sci-fi story. A ship is transporting a group of passengers and one dangerous criminal who are all in cryostasis. The ship is damaged due to some asteroids, forcing it to land on a nearby uninhabited planet. There's your setup. The hook is that during the crash, the captain is killed along with several of the passengers. You have this small band of survivors, including this dangerous criminal Riddick. That's your hook right there. That's what these people are now in, the survival situation. And there's a few factors going on. The captain is killed, so who would normally be the main leader is gone, and they've got this dangerous criminal with them. Just to give you a little bit more, just so that you can follow the story as I'm telling it, is that, during the crash, you have this co-pilot whose name is Caroline Fry. She tries to dump part of the hold of cryosleep passengers to lessen the weight during the crash to save herself and a few of the passengers. But she's stopped by this other character who's a law enforcement agent called Johns. That's just to give you an idea, because you will see that while Riddick is billed as the more maybe interesting, charismatic character, it really is Caroline Fry's character that goes through that overarching story structure. So where is the first plot point? Of course, you've got the survivors having to look around, find out where they are, find out their ship is damaged. They have to, that's all set up. They need parts to fix their ship so that they can escape. But the first plot point is when they discover that the planet, which appears to be uninhabited, is in fact inhabited by deadly creatures. And these particular creatures cannot come into sunlight, but a solar eclipse is coming in a matter of hours that's going to plunge the whole planet into darkness, and these creatures will come out and take out the entire group. That's the plot point. There's other things that have happened before this, but it's all been set up. So what is the first? So then we move into part two. That is the plot point that puts us into part two. If we didn't have that, if we didn't have deadly creatures, it would just be people wandering on a desert planet they would fix their ship, they would get off, they would go home, we'd have no story. But now they have to deal with being shipwrecked, needing to fix their ship, and this time deadline of this eclipse, or these creatures are going to come and devour everybody. So now we've moved into the wander phase. They are reacting to this. They gotta move. They gotta get going. They can't just lackadaisically wander around and rest and try to heal from this crash. And they gotta move. They gotta go. So the first pinch point is that while they are gathering the necessary materials to repair their ship, a party member is killed inside the darkness of a building. That little poke, that little reminder, what's at stake here? It's survival, and that there is no safety without light. So that's just that little poke. What's at stake here is the survival of this group. You know, they keep doing what they need to do. They're obviously horrified, you know, but we move on, or we move forward in the story. Where's the midpoint? The midpoint is when the light finally dies, when the eclipse comes upon the planet. At this point, the group has had to wander far from their ship in order to collect the fuel cell that they need, and now they are facing having to return to their ship in the darkness. So whereas previously they were reacting to things, they needed to find supplies for their ship, they needed to get off the planet. Now they have to decide to act. They have to go into the darkness and face almost certain death for a chance at survival. And the midpoint now shifts the entire focus of the story. I mean, yes, survival was at stake before, but the sunshine was still out. They at least had pockets of safety. Now their safety is shrinking. So that moves us into the attack or warrior phase. They have to take their survival into their own hands. They have to gather as many lights as they can and go out into the darkness. They also have to rely on this criminal Riddick, who, due to a procedure done to his eyes, he can see in the dark. So they also have to put their faith in this person who is very much so only concerned with his own safety. So they're on very shaky ground here. So where is the second pinch point? We already know that their survival's at stake. So how do you nudge the audience at this point? Like what else could, I mean, they're being chased by deadly creatures in the dark. what could we possibly, you know, have else to remind people of? You know, at this point, they've lost a few of their lights due to several mishaps, and the creatures seem to be able to find them no matter where they are, no matter what they go, no matter what they do. And Riddick points out that a character named Jack, who was thought to be a young boy or an adolescent boy, is actually female. And he says they're following the scent of her blood. So basically, the nudge there is that we can't even outrun them. We can't hide from them. You know, they're using their animal senses to track us. You know, they're, again, that reminder of there is no safety until they get off of this planet. Just story-wise, just to let you know, in case you're at all invested in this, is one of the survivors does suggest that they leave Jack as bait for the creatures, and the rest of them make a run for it. And Riddick, in a rare show of morals, sort of fights this person, leaves him wounded, and the rest of them make a run for it. All right, so fairly straightforward survival story so far. So where's the second plot point? And this is where sometimes in maybe stories that aren't structured as well, it can start to feel a bit contrived. And some, you know, movies or stories do it better than others. In this one, it begins to rain. So something outside their control. Their last lights, the last light that they have is fire. They have these rags soaked in alcohol bottles and, you know, with fire on top, and it starts to rain and those fires start to go out. So their last, you know, remaining bit of safety is being taken away from them. That's that second plot point is, well, actually, that's just what incites the second plot point. What the second plot point is due to this, Riddick hides them or tells them to go into this cave, and he puts a boulder over the door to seal them in and goes off to the ship alone. And now there's only 3 survivors left, or 4, including Riddick. The 3 are left to worry if this opportunistic criminal hasn't left them to die, and he's going to escape on his own. So that's that final piece of the puzzle, is that they have no safety left. They have no, there's nowhere else to go. You're at that sort of all is lost lull, and they are at the end of their rope, essentially. Moving into part 4, the resolution or martyr stage. As I said, really the main character is really this Caroline Fry character. Her and the others stuck in this cave, they discover these bioluminescent worms. So they stuff those in a bottle so she has a light, basically. And she goes to find Riddick and finds him planning to leave without the rest of them. He offers to take her with him, which echoes the beginning of the movie where she was willing to sacrifice passengers, showing she valued her own survival over the survival of others. But now, despite knowing that Riddick will leave without her, she refuses. He then agrees to rescue them out of sheer fascination that this person would die for these two people. The climax of the story, and that's what I mean, that's what I mean by martyr, is that really Caroline Fry is the main character. She's the one who goes through a change and to where she is now willing to die to save these other people. She's not willing to leave them behind and save her own life. The climax, which happens at about the 90% mark, there's only about 10% of the movie left, is while rescuing Jack and this imam, Riddick is separated from the group. The three remaining survivors have the opportunity to leave on the ship and to leave safely and leave Riddick behind or leave him to his fate. But Caroline, or Fry as she's called, goes after Riddick, rescuing him but getting killed in the process. So in that case, she did actually become the martyr, in that she was killed because she had so internalized that idea that she wasn't going to leave anyone behind. In case anyone's curious about the end of the movie, Riddick pilots the ship away with the last two survivors. And when Jack asks him what they should say about who Riddick is, since he's still a wanted criminal, he says to tell them that Riddick died on that planet. There's two more movies in that series, so the character does change a little. That incident does change him, but as I said, in this movie, it's hard to get lost that he's not actually the main character. It's really this Caroline Fry that goes through that arc. So I just wanted to, put that, kind of go over that as a way to really bring home what this story structure is, how it can be utilized, and just give you an example of real world example. So I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope it might have cleared some things up. I will say that if you did like this programming, or if you wanted to see more programming like it in the future, or if you just want to give us some feedback, please do contact us at our email address, which is Macedon Library Director, all one word, at owwl.org. I thank you for joining me today. Again, as I said, hopefully, this was helpful information to you, and I hope you all have a great, safe day. Thank you very much.